we'll jump right into it, and perhaps I'll, Wilson, if you want to, introduce yourself as well, and Tom, and then we can jump right into info and presentations you may have, Tom. But once again, thanks very much for joining our committee meeting here. We're certainly be very interested in hear all the fleet EV transition information. So, and hand it to y'all.
Very good. Well, I'll go ahead and introduce myself and then turn it over to Tom. But I'm Wilson Hudspeth, large account manager for City of Wilmington. I manage most of the municipalities, industrials, hospitals, universities, and everything between Morehead City and down here. And I'm lucky enough to manage the City of Wilmington and work with Dave and David and a handful of other folks with the city on a regular basis. And then I'll turn it over to Tom.
Thanks, Wilson. So my name is Tom Delvicio, and I am a regional electrification manager here at Duke on a sort of a specialized team in support of mostly our large portfolio customers called Transportation Electrification Grid Readiness. And so our job, and we'll get into this in a second, is to really get well-versed in the sort of expanding market that is transportation electrification. And that's really commercial focus. So we support, serve, and engage both public and private fleets as they plan out their electrification strategies and build projects and implementation timelines and support all of that from start to finish. And then we also support large public fast charging deployments. So charge point operators or CPOs are a growing marketplace, and we'll talk about that as well. But it's your Teslas, Electrify Americas, EVgo's, Ionas, all of these sort of folks that are out in the marketplace trying to sort of meet the growing need. I have a presentation. I repurposed it from a couple of different public engagements that I do, but I tuned it in, I think, to sort of a high level coverage. So I'm happy to get that running if that makes sense for the group.
Yeah, it certainly does, Tom. Yeah, appreciate it. I think you should be able to jump right in there.
Okay, let's hope. Fingers crossed on this. Let's see.
The moment of truth.
That's right. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, we got it. Yes. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, yep. Cool. All right. So now the added complication is, let me see if I can put it in presentation mode.
Yeah.
Okay, can you guys see it in full screen at this point?
Yeah, looks great.
Perfect. Okay, so I can't see you because you're on my read screen, so that you're not looking up my nose while I'm walking through this. So if there's anything that comes up, please call out, say, hey, I got a question on that. This is more of a discussion than anything else. But let me start with the high level. So as I said, part of a specialized group here at Duke, a team that covers actually all of our jurisdictions. So we're in the Carolinas, Florida, and the Midwest. And I put together, like I said, quick agenda here. So as always at Duke, we do a safety message. It will be EV themed, rest assured. And then we talk about sort of two higher level themes today that I like to talk about when I'm engaging on this. We'll look at sort of what we're doing on the grid side to try to get ahead of this new growth and be able to support our customers. And then there's a lot of planning that goes in, but then there's also practice. And so, as a customer who's planning but also wants to put in stations, we'll go over that a little bit as well. Okay, so the safety moment. I know you all are sort of at the beginning of your journey on this, but it never hurts to start too early with sort of the safety aspects of this equipment. So there are things that are safer than traditional fueling systems and things that have to be recognized as potential hazards. And so in your developing sites, I think it's important to think about the parking situation, how you're aligning things, how your signage that helps people know about the stations, guides them to it, but also, adequately lets them know there can be some danger to some of this stuff. It's electricity. And so when you're at the station, it really is important, especially if you're using them, to inspect the charging station every time you try to use it. So if you pull up to a charging station and you're like, thank goodness I can charge, but it looks damaged, I would really think twice about plugging into that station. There are other options and you can do some damage. So it's easy to inspect the cords that go to the plug that you actually put into the car. I oftentimes turn the pin head towards me so I can see the pins inside, make sure that they're not damaged. And even before that, I actually will tap on, if you're pulling the plug out of the holder, I will tap on that. We find that there's a little bit of heat that comes off of those, and bugs and critters sometimes like to get up in there. So if you tap, they'll fly out. You don't get a wasp when you grab the charging cord. So that's safety message. Okay, so here's my disclaimer. I talk to a lot of different groups, and it's customers, and it's public facing, and it's internal. So my presentation may be a little bit Frankenstein-y, where different parts and pieces are coming together. But if you need to stop me and I need any clarification, please do not hesitate. Okay, themes. So the two sort of main categories really are the rapid advance of this technology. So, and we'll talk about this in a second, but the manufacturers and the models are coming along pretty fast on this technology, especially since, you know, we've only had really a good 5 to 7 years of full-fledged development in this marketplace. So considering that, things are really moving forward very quickly. Battery tech and charging tech is really advancing quite quickly as well. And then the EV sort of use cases that we see are growing. So there's obviously the residential market, which is a high growth area, but we also see commercial industrial applications growing. There's micromobility, so all of those little scooters are everywhere now. We're seeing requests on full electric called eVTOLs, vertical takeoff and lift vehicles for regional transit. And then some of the freight ecosystems are starting to look at electrification as well. This really lends to sort of a breaking down of the silos. Traditionally, you know, folks worked in their own departments and they may have connected, but really not overlapped. The EV ecosystem is by design, by nature, overlapping. So vehicles come from the manufacturers or OEMs, and they go to a customer says, okay, I want to use this, but I need to build something to support my use of this. And by definition, they have to connect with their utility partner to get access to power. So all of those steps require coordination and connection. And then even at Duke here, we are starting to see a lot of this sort of breaking down our barriers. So we are a part of what was traditional load planning process, but we have a different flavor. We're building more and more programs, and we're using platforms internally and externally to sort of educate and connect the ideas and the work. So there's a lot going on in every point of this, sort of every leg of the stool has a lot going on, but it's all connected. Okay, I'll pause there. Any questions so far?
Anything? Rude? No,
You're
not
good?
yet. Thanks.
Okay, great. So I like to start with a history lesson. And like I said, I can't see you all, but I have up on the screen 2 pictures of the dawn of the automobile. These are 2 early prototype models. And I usually, when I'm in a room, I ask folks to guess the 3-wheeler and the 4-wheeler. So I'll give you a hint. They're different fuels that support. Does anyone want to guess what fuel is which side?
Electric on the left.
Electric on the left. Okay, so the 3-wheeler is electric. And what's on the right?
Could be something like steam or coal or.
Okay, those are really good guesses. So let me show you. All right, so the one on the left, which is actually, you can see my cursor right here. This is Carl Benz. So this one is actually a gas-powered 3-wheel car that Carl Benz patented back in the late 1800s. This here, you probably can't see him, but that's Edison right there. So this is actually an electric vehicle, and this one here, also electric. And then this one is actually a steam-powered carriage. And so in the sort of the dawn of automobiles, there were 3 primary technologies we covered. And it was sort of a race that there was nothing had established dominance. And so everyone was competing on value add. And so there's actually a study done by a group out of Nature Energy, it's called. And they built a model about this period of time, this early, late 1800s, early 1900s, and they compared the different technologies and the different, pieces and parts. And their findings were that The two primary technologies that emerged were really electric and gas. And there was cost parity between these in terms of like which one you could procure, how much did they cost. EVs are actually seen as higher end because they were quieter and they worked really well on city streets, which there's more money there. Similar operating ranges. The average range increase was roughly the same between that in that early period. So it wasn't like one was better than the other. And electric cars were heavier, quieter, and cleaner, so they did better on paved roads. So they were more a fashion of the cities versus the country. Okay. What they did was they tuned this model forward and they said, okay, like if we sort of set them all equal and we tune the dial forward, let's say 15 to 20 years, what's the factor, the X factor that meant gas won over electric? And it was really infrastructure. So if the grid had been better developed, 15, 20 years ahead of that at that time, all signs point that we would be driving electric vehicles now, just because they had the capabilities. They cleaned up the cities, which were fighting a lot of pollution, and they were good vehicles, reliable vehicles. So we missed our opportunity then, but here we are now. And so I'm just gonna, yeah, please.
Hey, Tom, so was the gas infrastructure already there at that period of time?
It was just a little bit more portable, I think, is what really ended up happening. It was sort of like, the utility grid now, sort of we started with big centralized generation and then sent it everywhere. You could think of that as almost more of gas was, believe it or not, almost like a solar distributed market where you could depot in regional areas and then fill up those areas so that you could move more distance. Electric had to be directly connected, tied via wire. And so since that's costly work, it took longer to get done versus putting tanks in the ground or having stores of fuel.
Gotcha, thanks.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm just going to do a really high level coverage. The EV market is really growing quite a bit. One of the big focuses, one of the reasons we focus so heavily on this is that, transportation system accounts for almost 30% country's greenhouse gas emissions. And so if you hit this part of the sort of operational paradigm, you really have a good opportunity to bring down greenhouse gas emissions and decarbonize. There's a rapidly growing marketplace for these. The technology, as I said before, is improving greatly and the use cases are improving greatly. And so as you look at adoption, and this is on the left-hand side, this is cumulative adoption over time. Obviously, we're very much on the upstroke here. And I sort of kept it in the United States, and we have considerable growth over the last, like I said, 5+ years or so. If you look at the rest of the world, however, and it's a little hard to see, but China's orange, Europe is blue, where the green, and then the rest of the world is this gray color. You can see really all of a sudden in about 2020, really, it just started to accelerate like crazy. But you can see the vast majority of that growth is going to be in China and Europe. We are obviously growing, but we're really falling behind quite a bit. And on the technology side as well, I won't talk about that later, but and this is by quarter, similar trend, but you get the idea.
Hey,
It's
Tom,
quite a bit of growth. Yeah.
Tom, do you have that normalized, the previous chart? Do you guys, or I mean, I know it's not your chart, but
It's not, but
obviously there's 1 point whatever billion people in China and there's 300 million people in the United States. So is there any normalized data to say per person what the acceptance rate is?
yeah, on a sort of per capita basis, it is, it's a couple of factors above the United States in terms of adoption. Went through a little bit of research on like sort of the inflection point of when a market gets to this saturation tipping point and then adoption takes off. It's like the IEA and a couple of different groups set it around 10% adoption sort of per capita for the country. And we're sort of nearing that now, but we have some unique factors in the United States. What make it different, I think it's the size of the country, the dominance of traditional technology, the fact that, manufacturing is not vertically integrated like it is in, let's say, China, for example. So there's a lot of different factors, but yeah, we're we're growing, but we're not yet at that tipping point, and many others are, like Europe and China.
And a second follow-up question to that. It's a kind of a two-part question. What about the cost of electricity per country versus, the acceptance rate? And then
Yeah.
the other is, I forgot what I was going to ask.
The first one's a good one. The first one's a good one. It's one, one that we think about a lot. And I spent years and years in energy efficiency. And so down in this territory, folks may not feel it, but we have lower general electricity rates. And so when you don't pay as much, it's harder to get your return on investment for traditional, let's say, energy efficiency. Whereas if you're talking about California or the Northeast, the turnaround is much higher, much quicker. And so I think you see that also. There's an analog for EV adoption as well, where higher rates of electricity, or like, let's say, higher rates of traditional fuels, and goes to the policy side, create an incentive to move towards electric consumption and electric vehicles. And in those countries, that policy layer is really kind of pushing folks in that direction. When you have more of a market at your base, you can also do a lot more things on the utility side in terms of integrating programs where, vehicles not only pull power from the grid, but they also push back, where they vary their charge depending on time of use rates and things like that. So once there's a bigger pool of vehicles to sort of play with, there are other advantages that I think you can see, like I said, more in Europe and China. China, there's, a huge state push for all of this. It's sort of energy independence. It's a global manufacturing dominance. And it's also a environmental sort of focus on cleaning up cities that are, highly manufacturing oriented and very dirty, and there's lots of health issues. And so these, do decarbonize and take that kind of stuff out of the air. So I think China's a little different, but lots of good factors pushing them towards it.
My second question was around policy, and from an outside perspective looking in, we saw under the previous Biden administration, we saw a lot of government subsidies and a lot of pushing towards that. And then towards the end of that administration, now the start of the new administration, we've seen some shifting from EVs to more hybrids. Are there key milestones or even just say from 2020 where you start seeing this large uptick in cars? Is there things that we can point to and say, hey, this has really been a change statement in the acceptance rate? Like, I don't know what they're doing in China as an example. I don't understand. I don't know what the policy is.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think the change in administration certainly had a dampening effect on the market in general. I'll say that with caveats. I still see within our work here at Duke on my team, there is some concern about federal incentives and supports and programs and grants, but the vast majority of customers we're working with are still moving forward. They may sort of slightly vary their plans a bit, but we don't see any backtracking that I can tell. There's also, I think, a component of it that comes out where, are you familiar with the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, the NEVI program? Does that sound familiar?
That's a new one to me. No.
It was basically, it was under the IRA, BIL, the infrastructure rules that passed under Biden. And the idea was fairly simple, which was across the country on major corridors, there should be at least 4 fast chargers every 50 miles. So if you had an EV, you wouldn't worry about getting stuck because we place these things along every single major corridor. Now the market has placed a bunch of other stuff out there too. But like if you're traveling on a highway, which is the use case where EVs, folks get scared about EVs, that goes into effect. So in North Carolina, for example, we work closely with NCDOT on this program because they were the administrators. The first phase was approved and the funds were designated. And so that's moving forward. But the number of sites that I'm currently working on within Duke territory, which is the vast majority of North Carolina, because they're on major corridors. Six sites. So it wasn't like a huge amount. Now, as I said, we work with Tesla, Electrify America, EVgo. I've got tens and tens of projects from all of those folks, not inside the federal programs at all, just building because they're trying to meet the demand of folks buying EVs and needing to use those stations and trying to get a customer base. So,
Hey, Tom, sorry, real quick, do you know if any of those NEVI sites in North Carolina are actually in the process of construction and able to draw down those funds?
yep, the first, I think it's, let's see, I think it's 9 in North Carolina total for phase 1. And they've all been, those funds have been distributed and approved. And so at last check, and NCDOT has said this publicly, at last check, we're moving forward that phase. There was additional phases, and they're all on hold until who knows what happens. But all of those sites, and you can find them pretty easy on the NCDOT site, but I
Yeah.
can also have them too. Those are all moving forward.
Yeah, I think we have one across the river from us over in Leland.
Yeah, that sounds, yep, that sounds right. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, it's a dampening. I'd say things like, electric school buses, EPA was putting out quite a bit of money for electric school buses. And I think that was helping to spur the market because, building a new type of vehicle requires a lot of front end investment from the manufacturers. And so I think that helped get over that hump. What I think we'll see is as subsidies kind of fall away, at least in the short term, those OEMs now have the production lines built. They want to sell the vehicles. And so they're going to have to sharpen their pencil on their costs. And that's going to actually bring the cost down. And so I think that's going to really happen with most of the market. And I think we're already starting to see that in the retail market, not to go too far off track, but you can get like a used EV now if you look up even like a Volkswagen ID4, which is a nice, it's marketed as a luxury SUV. I saw one that was 2 years old, under 40,000 miles, and was about $22,000. So, in terms of used car sales, not bad. And I just last week had a colleague walk in and been like, I bought an EV. She's like, I went and I didn't even know I was going to turn my lease in. Looked like a great deal, so I just bought it. I was like, well, did you do research? And she's like, well, I sit next to you, so it should be fine. But I think we are getting a tipping point in the market where people are starting to say, okay, I'll jump in. Move forward on the slide. Okay. All right, let's see. And I got another one. This is just, again, adoption. So question of the group, it's a guess, globally, as of 2025, how many EV models, like distinct EV models from different manufacturers, do you think there were globally in 2025? And shout it out because I can't see you.
Additional models.
Yeah. Like if you went to any country in the world and said, and you just did an accounting of how many EV different types of models, cars, manufacturers offering, what number would you think we're at currently globally?
75.
Don't worry. There's no demerits if you you don't get it. It's totally fine. I'll give you this one. It's 700. So 700 different models available globally in 2025. It's expected to rise quite a bit. How about the US? How many did we have in 2025 for the US?
200.
200? Keep on going down.
50.
Yeah, I would say like 30.
57. So
That was
again.
What year was that? 2020.
2025. Yeah, 2025. Yeah.
Is there a projection for, the next year?
Yeah, this slide up here is Statistica, and it has sort of available models, and it stopped at 2021, and I think they have some additionals, but we're point being we're a big market, right? We should probably have more available here, but again, we've got some interesting headwinds to deal with.
So can you talk about a little bit about those barriers to entry that like the other manufacturers are seeing? Because I mean, even even when I'm in Europe, like I am now, like I'm walking down the street and I see like 3 different models of Ford electric vehicle that we don't have in the States. American
Yes.
companies selling EVs in Europe that like they don't sell at home.
Right. Right. And I think, there's sort of art and science here, but I think there's there's a lot of things that go into it, but some of it is sort of the CAFE standards of like, what do you need your emissions control and your fuel efficiency on vehicles. There was a exception given back a couple of decades for trucks because they were ascribed to be work vehicles versus personal vehicles. And so SUVs and trucks got lumped into that category. And because they're high margin vehicles, and people like them, they feel safe in them. They feel like they can cart all their stuff. I think the American market has sort of grown up around bigger and bigger vehicles. So I think in European Chinese market, particularly Europe, they don't have the same kind of passion for large vehicles, and you've got a lot more population density and a lot more sort of historic areas where you can't really expand in certain ways. So I think medium to smaller cars actually work really well for their context. And then you put that policy layer on top of it and say, you get dinged if you use petrol, right? And, or you have to roll back by a certain point because Europe tends to be a lot more sort of forward focused in that regard. And it depends on the country, but as you move between countries, you usually have to sort of adopt typical standards. So I think that's a big part of it. Just the market flavor is different. And I think that, our manufacturers here domestically have recognized that there's more options and more availability to sell their vehicles internationally. One thing that does concern me that sort of the current sort of pushback on electric vehicles, despite the rest of the world moving forward at some incredible speed, I think is going to hurt our domestic manufacturers in their domestic markets, which are their biggest markets. And I think it's also going to ensure a bit that they don't do as much R&D on developing new vehicles and options. And so I think their global markets might shrink as well. So it's going to be a challenge. It's hard to fight BYD, out of China. The kind of vehicles they produce are very high quality, they're very technology oriented, and they're incredibly cost effective. They have ranges from, you can get a brand new EV, very bare bones, for under 10 grand over there, and you can get one that's 100 grand with all the bells and whistles you could ever imagine, including reclining seats and drop down screens and all kinds of stuff. So, I think this market is poised for Americans who like their, options and their features to grow, but I do think we have, again, some headwinds here. And that's my opinion, not the opinion at Duke Energy, but that's my opinion. All right, so let me keep on going. All right, so I like to talk about like sort of equivalencies because my job really is to help work with customers so that we, first of all, are not a barrier to entry. So if you need to deploy and you want to build out electric vehicle infrastructure, the power provider wants to support you in that. Of course, we have our business case there, but it's also part of our decarbonization strategy. We're doing it internally. And so what we have to often talk to folks about on the front end is, what does this mean when you put one of these on the system? And so this is a pretty nice breakdown. I like, a typical retail application, you put one at your house, 7.2 kW charger, equivalent of putting in like a electric range or electric dryer. So yes, it's a load add, but it's, we can accommodate a lot of it. Sometimes you don't even have to upgrade your panel. If you have a garage, it's easy to run a circuit. So sometimes not that hard to do. Now, if you're in a development of 250 homes and everybody starts to see their neighbor with one and wants to get one, and there's a good deal, and I know a guy, and so on and so forth, then we start to get a little bit concerned about our equipment. And so we put standards into place to sort of accommodate and plan for adoption over time so that we don't blow any transformers and nobody has any outages. So we're making those plans on the residential side, but we take a sort of a different approach on the commercial side. So if you look at the larger vehicles sort of, and we're adopting Lightnings and Silverado EVs, this is a larger battery pack, and so typically needs a larger charger to sort of support it. Still level 2, so not a sort of 3-phase fast charging situation, but a higher powered level 2. And this one could be equivalent to a HVAC system for a house. If you start to look at the medium duty marketplace, let's say 50 kW chargers are used for these sort of the cab over box trucks. You could be talking about the equivalent of a small apartment complex in just one plug. And then if you think about the semis or the larger vehicles, and this is a bit undersized at this point, but they can use the equivalent of a fast food restaurant in just one plug. So as I move forward on that, if we take that and we look at the grid perspective, we say, okay, what happens when we put 50 passenger cars in a neighborhood? We're looking at, potential max growth or load or pressure on the system of 360. And you can see the equivalencies here. So this is the medium duty 750. This is the Transamerican building. So that's a 750, that's 2 megawatts, 20 buses, 3 megawatts, so more power than the Transamerica building. You've got your Empire State Building, at 25 Class 8 trucks. You could quickly get to this point. And there's a heck of a lot more Class 8 trucks on the road that would eventually be electrified than there are Empire State Buildings. And further, it took years and years and years to build this. You can put infrastructure in to support this kind of thing just logistically in, 8 to 10 months. So this presents some challenges for us. And it's not even the beginning of this. We're already seeing this. I have one project now and a couple in the queue. And this is, larger heavy duty vehicles, so transportation semis that are requiring systems that have megawatt charging. So they start anywhere from 750 kW and go up all the way up to 375. And you can get a sense of, 1 megawatt of power could be 800 homes, 20 fast chargers, so on and so forth. So quite a bit of power requirements and draw from these things. Okay, I've got a quick succession.
Is this compare? I got a question. So is this comparison if it's pumping out electricity 24 hours a day, or is it just I don't?
Yeah, good question. So so if you plugged this vehicle in and you said, I'm going to take as much possible power as I can out of grid, that amount of instantaneous power draw might be the same as if 800 homes were on a hot summer day and they were running their HVAC systems full bore. So, to beat back the heat. So just one of those vehicles, one of those plugs could be the equivalent of like 800 homes. So you can see how compressed that power is. Now the usage is different and we'll get that in a second, but like we have to be able to size our system to be able to accommodate this large inrush of power, so that if we don't do that, and somebody tries to do that and hasn't talked to us or hasn't put in the right equipment, you can actually blow their transformer, you can damage lines, you can, trip off a bunch of stuff. And so our job is to really figure out how to support this power demand at any given maximum power demand at any given time, while also, building a system that's not too overbuilt so that we don't spend too much money for a situation that, may never occur. So balance point.
Tom, the level 2 chargers, those are typically found in residential homes. Is this essentially saying that a level 2 charger is equivalent to 3 average US homes?
So it depends. So yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
I said load. Sorry.
Yeah. So if you go back here,
Yep.
and you say, okay, I want a 19.2, right? Because I got a truck. It could be the equivalent, and like I said, it's about the maximum power draw potential, but we don't anticipate that you'll use this. But we have to size the system so that if you did, for whatever reason, pull that maximum power, you wouldn't break anything. But so that level 2 high power would be more equivalent to something like this, like an HVAC system. Extend.
And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about everything going on in the AI data center space and great challenges there. I mean, this obviously the acceptance rate of this is not as high as the data center rate that we currently are seeing, but these are, if you're thinking about overnight depots, and I'm thinking about every truck stop on 95 and 40 and 77 and 85 in the state at 26. I mean, that's a lot of overnight charging that would have to occur.
Yes, it is. And the good thing is that, overnight we typically have low volumes on the grid.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
plugging in a car at a depot or at your home overnight, the cost of power is relatively cheap because we have some of our generation assets, continue to, like our nuclear portfolio, you can't tune that up or down. It's sort of like you turn it on and that's it. So you have continuous power on those systems. And so we need some place to send it. And we can store some of it, and we're growing in our sort of battery deployments along this on these grounds, but it's not there yet. So it's actually good to have something that will draw sort of consistent power over the evening periods because it helps us utilize our system more effectively. We just have better utilization across the 24-hour cycle. And that brings in additional sort of revenue that we can use to support and develop the system. There are also opportunities for us, like I said, to avoid certain, like if we said, okay, you're going to do all this during the day and we're already compressed on the day because everybody's charging, we'd have a problem because we'd have to rebuild everything. If you have a certain amount of power utilization during the day, and then you have, let's say, 60% of that overnight on that same circuit due to a lot of electric vehicles, there's no problem with that. And we actually just get more value out of that infrastructure. So electric vehicles, generally speaking, have a great window for charging on our system because we do have the capacity to serve a lot of those vehicles. And by and large, most folks who own an EV charge at home overnight. And so part of my job is to actually look at the deployments where, like your data center, if you have an area that's going to grow quickly and have really dense power needs, then we need to plan around that particular area. And that's actually the next set of slides. So I'll pause here because I'm going to run through these kind of quick because it kind of gives a visual of growth. But any questions at this point?
We're not shy about jumping in, Tom.
That's okay. I don't mind. So this is, so EPRI is the Electric Power Research Institute industry group that does a lot within the utility space and beyond, along a lot of different technologies. They have a sort of a dedicated team that's working on sort of projecting this kind of growth across the country and across different utilities. And we are a partner of theirs, as are many large utilities and also co-ops in general. And what they're trying to do is build a database of potential growth. And it's based on a whole lot of stuff. It's based on EV registrations and business utilization and use cases and, commercial traffic corridors and things. But if you can see on this grid here, they've got hexes, and these hexes basically represent, this one is for energy, not power demand, but utilization, so megawatt hours. So you can see there's a scale here. As it gets darker, it's heavier. And just to give you a sense, again, I like to use equivalencies. So like 1 megawatt hour, which would be like sort of towards this side of the equation, that's sort of the equivalent to powering an average American home for about 1.2 months, a megawatt hour. You could drive an electric vehicle for about 3,600 miles on that. You could power 2 60-watt light bulbs nonstop for a year. You could smelt 137 pounds of aluminum. You could toast about 90,000 slices of bread, or you could run an average pool pump for about 5 months straight on that power. So as I flip through here, so this is starting in 2025, and this is sort of their conservative projections of growth. And you can see you guys are here. All right, so let me flip forward here. That's 2026, 2027, 2028, 2029, 2030. Okay, so you can see the growth of that, and this is primarily around transportation electrification, but you can see that growth. This is actually an overlay of all the EV charging stations currently publicly registered. So you can see it, an obvious trend of clustering around these areas of growth, yourselves included. This is a full electrification. Like if everyone who could do it would do it, this is what the map would look like, which is pretty heavy. We do not anticipate this. And then this is actually going to be power. So this, we talked about the maximum amount of power you would draw from the grid. So this is the same kind of thing with power factored in. That's 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. And then this is full. That's 20, 30. Yep. That's full electrification. And then this one is actually tuned. This is 2030 and this is 2030, which you can see at the bottom here. This is managed charging. So the idea here is if we did nothing and we just let all these vehicles come on, this is the kind of power impacts we might see. If we worked with customers and said, hey, during our peak periods in the summer, if you offset your charging from 6 to 9, you start at 9:30, then we can go from here down to here. And so this is how we're starting to think about interacting with customers to sort of dampen down the impacts on the grid and be able to serve more customers. That's the maximum utilization there.
What does that look like, Tom? The managed growth? What programs do y'all see?
Yeah, so initially, because programs take a while to research, build, and then get approval from the regulatory commissioners on, what you typically see with this kind of thing to start is sort of a passive signaling approach, which is, hey, if you got an EV, here's this time of use rate schedule. And if you adhere to this, if you program this into your charger, it's going to cost you less to run your vehicle. And this is for residential customers, but also for fleet customers as well. Say, okay, if you avoid these peak periods, it's like congestion pricing. So like, you try to go to work at 7 a.m. on a Monday morning, it's going to be nasty on the highways. If you wait a few hours and you can flex your schedule around it, you can travel at 10:30 and it'll be easy breezy. So that's the whole idea here, where you could say, if you have an EV, and we know you do because you told us, or we put in the project, here are some ways you can try to depress your cost by simply flexing your operations. And so that's the passive level of that. Once that sort of happens and you start to establish the sort of the trends, you can more actively maximize that by saying, hey, listen, you're in a program. We actually have a monitor that looks at your usage. We're going to call for certain periods where we have really high utilization, you're going to back off. It shouldn't affect your trip because you'll still be able to charge your car, get to where you got to go. But if you avoid that peak period, we're going to give you extra money on top for your bill credit or your operations, your business. And so that's more of an active thing. And then a couple steps further, there are programs, mostly in California, sort of in trial now, where it's like you give us the ability to control your fleet a little bit and say, at the end of the day, you want to do this amount of mileage. We're not going to affect that, but we are going to flex your utilization and charging over time so that it's the best for our grid, the grid benefit, and then we'll pay you for that. Or the other example, and this is in process right now, we have a vehicle to grid program for electric school buses, where we were empowered by the commission to help support procuring electric school buses. And we are testing if you can take that bus and you can charge it from the grid, and then during certain defined periods, you could actually pull power out of that bus battery and push it to the grid. So you're in fact feeding the grid from that asset, just like essentially like a virtual power plant. And so if we had, for example, a school bus depot of 50 buses over the summer, and we had some really high utilization on the circuit that they set, we could potentially contract with the school and say, hey, listen, if you let us pull X amount of energy out during this period of time, we'll pay you for it. And it'll help us keep the grid running smoothly and then avoid upgrades potentially to that circuit. Questions on that?
Well, how does seasons affect that though? Like if everyone starts to charge overnight and then, sometime that's great, but then in the wintertime when heat's getting pumped out, does everyone have to adjust their schedule? Or I guess
it would be, I think this is all eventually going to where you just tell your, your AI manager that, hey, go ahead and digest the utility rate schedule. and then set up my charging around this, my end goal is like, I need to get to work and I need to have enough range by X time in the morning. And the technology is going to do it for you. But during this period, during our summer season, we really only 6 to 9 p.m. is our peak period on time of use. And then during the winter, 6 to 9 a.m. during the winter period is peak. So there's only really one peak per day in the seasons. So it's really just, it's like, when you flip your fans, and in the winter, they should be pulling air up and circulating. In the spring and summer, they should be pushing down to make people more comfortable. That same idea. It's full. Okay, and this is actually, and this is full but managed charging. So you can see that impact of managed charging that we kind of talked about. All right, I know I'm kind of, if anybody's getting bored of the discussion, please let me know. But, and I know I'm kind of, I think we planned for half an hour. I'm a little over here. But so just really quick, this is our team. This is kind of what we do. We do a bunch of stuff, and it's really about working with our customers to work on that sort of planning aspect of things. We like to try to forecast 12 to 24 months out for sites that are going to come on, especially larger sites, so we can ensure that we have the power to serve and that it's in our record and we can justify the cost to our commission so that we can support customers' growth. We do this sort of on a project sort of portfolio basis, but we also work on in the regulatory landscape to help our commission understand the challenges and opportunities. And then we do a lot of public engagement and different things like that. These are the two sort of variations of what we work on. As I mentioned before, we've got our sort of public customers and fleet customers, and that can take a couple of different flavors. And then this is the public DCFC. I mentioned the public charging. So this is a big ecosystem. This is charge management hardware, providers, fueling providers, all kinds of stuff. So this is a growing aspect as well. I'll give real quick through. We have been working to understand what we call fleet clusters. So if you think about it, if you see a distribution park, let's say Amazon last mile facility, there's sort of an anchor there, and then there's a bunch of stuff that develops around it. So you get your distribution park. So if Amazon calls us and says, hey, listen, we're going to electrify, we may be able to support that project, right? And then let's say they're working with, it's either a competitor or they're working with somebody else in their ecosystem, and they say, okay, well, Amazon's doing it and they're kind of requiring us to move that direction too. So we need to bring on vehicles. So you start to get a domino fall situation. So we wanted to be able to look out over our territories and start to proactively identify these clusters. We started very manually, but we've moved to a more sophisticated process where we're actually using AI to look over maps. And I'll see on the next page here. We basically are using a computer vision model, and it will scroll over our territories. It will identify areas of clustering vehicles sort of on the commercial side. And then it will start to sort of identify, parcelize, and then categorize these vehicles based on how we're training it. The idea being that we can understand what the baseline is. Transportation sector and electric utilities have not been bedfellows. We have not needed to be. But if we can understand where all of these things are located, depoted, and how they move, we can better sort of align our system with that type of growth as we go. And then we also are layering in, you recognize the EPRI data, this on top of that. I'll just 2 more quick slides. So one of the things that we're trying to do is, we try to get power and help strategically plan with customers, but we also, in the relationship development, expect that it's not just we set you on your path and you're good to go. A lot of folks, this is their first time around on this, and they're still getting used to the technology and getting approvals and implementation. And so we find there's a good opportunity to build a long-term relationship. This is an electric school bus customer who, put the buses in, got some grant money, was excited, and then didn't manage their charging. They just figured they plugged it in and that was all there was to it, and ended up bumping themselves out of their rate class. They hit a threshold of power demand and they got pushed up. And so then all of a sudden they got a lot of demand charges they weren't expecting. So we took it as an opportunity to go back and look and understand the use case and the vehicles and their duty cycle and how they could better operate the system so that they kept their costs predictable and low. And then this also provides additional benefit to our system because, again, if we can manage those peaks and tamp them down, oftentimes we can avoid unnecessary or hopefully unnecessary upgrades to the grid just because, a few hours out of a few months, there is some real strain on the grid. And if we can do that via this coordinating with this market, then it's really good for everyone. And the last one is EVs are really distributed energy resources. Electrons are flexible fuel. You can move it back and forth, you can shift it, you can tamp it down. So there's a variability and a sort of configurability to EVs that a lot of traditional loads don't have. And so, we look at them sort of as a glue. They're not going to be everything. They're not going to replace solar and not going to replace large scale batteries and renewable generation or anything like that. But they are going to be potentially a tool for us and for customers to help modulate and manage the grid a little bit better as we go forward and for cost effectiveness and reliability. So I think that's the last. Yep, that's the last slide.
Appreciate it, Tom, very much. And
There's a lot. I know. Sorry, there's a lot.
Yeah. No, and we talked briefly last week with Tom and Wilson just in prep for this meeting, and mentioned that we've got our own fleet transportation study coming up, and it's we've hired ICF to do that, which is a group that you've worked with previously as well.
Yep.
Which perhaps there's some benefit add that you could also provide, and your team could provide in making that study more robust as well. And perhaps I don't know, perhaps a few words on that and that relationship, and
Sure.
and perhaps other cities that you've worked with as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we find it's fairly common that as you're planning out a strategy that you look to industry to help sort of understand what's important and how to structure it and how to move it forward in reasonable ways. We have been pushing for approval for programs across our jurisdictions to support fleet electrification advisory programs. We had success in the Midwest in Indiana, got a program approved out there, and actually ICF was the deliverer of that service that bid competitively to win that contract. And so we've had our team directly has had a lot of contact with them and worked through various fleet studies. So we really kind of know what they offer and how it goes. And we see a real benefit to that from customer planning and execution, but really for us aligning the power structure around to support that development. And so we got a program approved in Florida as well, and we're trying to get more programs approved in the Carolinas to support that kind of analysis and research. We don't have one here, but I'm effectively sort of an informal fleet advisory. So as you work through your study, which I know is funded, I'm your sort of go-to resource on the Duke side to help sort of integrate, the equipment procurement and logistical organization with our power system. And, looking at sites even and saying, well, you've got extra capacity on the transformer that's already serving the building. Maybe consider tapping the additional capacity to run the electric vehicle service equipment so that you don't have to put in a dedicated service and pay extra facility fees, and we have to dig and bore and so on and so forth. So we get down to even to the nitty gritty, but sort of bottom line, I'm here to support that kind of work, and having a consultant that has plans and experience is always a good thing to make that even more impactful.
Yeah, I think as we get a little bit more further along with the study and mapping out the sites and potential number of vehicles that are going to be hosted at those sites, would love to be able to tap into your team's expertise to kind of come and look at what the current grid in those areas is looking
Absolutely.
like, infrastructure.
Absolutely. And I tell most folks, like, level 2 charging, unless you're putting in 50 plus chargers, by and large, we can accommodate that fairly easily. That doesn't mean it's not a good conversation to have, but if you're thinking about the fast charging infrastructure, you may not have that type of power available. And we may also have some capacity constraints depending on the circuit that you're locating, or even on a property, maybe you have a couple of overhead primaries coming by and one is good on this side and this one's tapped out. So either we do some switching to bring it around to the right side of the property, or we think about placing it in an area that's really got great access to power and is going to be really cost effective.
Is there any way to find out that information beforehand, before they finish this study? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can send over your primary sites and I'll do a high level capacity check. So capacity, our system, we have an obligation to serve. So it's really a first come first serve system. So like we don't hold anything for anybody, which is actually good, because if we did that, then folks would tie up the lines and we'd have all kinds of problems. But we like to know about it beforehand, because we will put a pin on our map and say, listen, City of Wilmington is putting in a bunch of refuse haulers and they're going to need a bunch of three-phase power here. So let's make sure that this circuit has enough as we go forward, and we'll continue to check in with you as you're sort of going through that, procurement and cycle, and say, okay, how close are we getting? So we'll, in effect, keep a record of everything and try to accommodate things. Even though we don't reserve, we do plan. And so it's good to know. If we don't know, then it's really hard to support. And we have had, unfortunately, circumstances where folks applied for grants, got transit buses, and didn't have access to power they needed at their depot. So had to have the buses sit while we prepare things. And like I said, we never want to be the barrier to electrification, but it's really hard to align the kind of power required if we don't have heads up.
Yeah, well, that's why it's great to have these early discussions, just such as this, so y'all are aware of the pathway that we're on and kind of timeline that we're looking at and plans we're making. So,
Exactly.
Rich, PJ, any additional questions from y'all virtually?
No, I don't. Thank you, Tom.
Of course. And I would say, it's the conversation, but it's the relationship. So, where I live now, and you can always send me questions, get me involved. That's really what I'm here to do for Wilson and his customers, is to be that dedicated layer of support for this, because it's a lot of new for everyone. I mean, in full honesty, ourselves as well. We're going through similar interesting issues and questions as we electrify our fleet as well. So, everybody's kind of in it together. We're building the EV while we're driving it, but there's no reason to not move forward until perfect being the enemy of the good.
Curious
And
if
also say too that we, in suggesting and supporting things, we never push customers to do anything. It really should make sense for your business operations. So there may be some vehicles that are just do not have equivalent options at this point. And the work that ICF does through our program, we never suggest something that wasn't cost effective. It will probably eventually get there, but we really want to support what's plausible, feasible for the city, because we're not trying to drive anybody to anything, but we again don't want to be the barrier, and we are your power partner.
questions from you. Tom Wilson, thanks very much. This has been really informative, and look forward to working with y'all as we continue on our path.
Perfect. Well, like I said, just ring us up anytime you need help, but we're here to support.
Thanks again.
Okay.
Tom, appreciate it.
Good afternoon.
Thanks, everybody. I'll call maybe anything.
All right, thanks, Wilson.
Thank
That's
you.
all. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Good team to know that. He actually spoke at the state energy conference as well. I had a big audience in it. So
Yeah, you see some of the complications they face with these maps, and you're like,
Yeah.
wow, to think about it all as far as like future.
yeah,
And
yeah. EV growth is only one side of it for sure.
yeah, but it's kind of like new for them a little bit in that it's vehicles specifically for Duke. And,
Well, I think the largest technical challenge, I think we talked about this in a previous meeting, but like Dominion Energy just announced a 900 megawatt transmission service to a data center complex. It's not hard to move, a gigawatt of energy, but these chargers are spread out all over the place now and they're down corridors, which, interstate roads, and not many interstates do you drive down do they parallel with utility lines. And so and that's what I've never seen that graphic where he showed, the 1 megawatt's equal to 800 homes, which is equal to this many level 2 chargers and fast chargers, et cetera. I did not realize that they were that consuming of energy, the peak demand. And
Yeah.
if you think about, I don't, Sean, maybe you frequent truck stops. I don't frequent truck stops overnight. And
What are you trying to say?
count the trucks? But I mean, like, when I do travel and I see them, if it's early in the morning or late in the afternoon, you see all the trucks that are sitting at the truck stop. Could you imagine each one of those being plugged in? I did see a recent, not recent, it was probably about a year or two ago, where these truck stops were have these HVAC pull downs that they could open their window and pull the HVAC into the vehicles, so the trucks don't sit there and idle. So, I mean, that's got to be, if you look at the CO2 emissions per vehicle or per tonnage or whatever metric you want to, trucks are the biggest opportunity overall to reduce some of the CO2 emissions. So they gotta figure that out somehow with charging.
Yeah, those numbers were pretty crazy, like to think the amount of homes per one of those units. But I got to wrap my head around it a bit more. It's a little bit confusing. So I'll look at the slide or something.
Yeah,
But it seemed kind of incredible.
it was an interesting slide for sure. Yeah, I mean, they've kind of got to build to the worst case scenario, like he was saying, just in case you ever need that much power from one of those units. So
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was just from a single unit. Yeah, it's like PJ, how many of those units would a large truck stop need? Their needs.
Yeah. We also think of like growth of like housing developments and stuff. You can kind of like plan a little bit better. I don't know, maybe not. As far as cars, it just seems like a whole nother bunch of calculations, a bunch of unknowns, and I don't know.
I think some of the newer developments, though, they are kind of looking at some of those things when they go in and imagine, okay, we're going to do this, and then that way the infrastructure is more accommodating.
Yeah.
Well, we'll certainly be having lots of future discussion on our fleet electrification, but yeah, just in regard to that item number two, the first item is just our kickoff meeting with ICF happened, I don't know, a week or so ago. They sent over kind of some initial data requests. It was just between the ICF team, Dave Mays, and our fleet manager initially here, be pulling in a larger group of city staff from across departments as we move along, just so we're getting everyone's input. But I think right now we're tentatively scheduling a meeting every month with ICF. First step is getting their data request for kind of a fleet inventory from the fleet manager, who's right now in the process of transitioning to or upgrading the software that they tracks everything with. So we're targeting sometime in July to get that information back to ICF so we can begin to.
How long of a study do you think it'll be? Like a year-long study?
Yeah, they gave us a timeline as well. Hopefully a little under a year. They're looking at, I think, 8 to 10 months. They gave us kind of a chart with some key dates where they need information from us. So part of that is on us.
But 8 to 10 months, you'll have the final product in 8 to 10 months, or they review the information kind of, so it'll be a little bit later.
The final report. 8 to 10 months. But yeah, again, a lot of that relies on us getting data to them and information up to them.
It might be good to get
Time wise.
your I mean, I imagine you have, if you're going for those higher class EV chargers, you probably know where they would be already. Might be good just to get his input sooner rather than later.
Definitely would want to go ahead and map out those sites. Certainly probably on at our ops center where, like, I mean, he mentioned refuse trucks. You know, that's obviously down the road quite a bit. We just bought a bunch of replacing with the new automated side loading trucks. Brand new with some more coming. So, you know, service life for those probably 8 to 10 years, somewhere in there. Depending on how much abuse they take over at the landfill. But, and we, you know, I don't think we want to be the guinea pigs in regard to 100% electric refuse trucks. So some of those models are a little bit further down the road, but, you know, certainly a lot of our light duty, we've got a large light duty fleet out at the ops center. There's quite a few in and around this building. Police department, obviously a lot of light duty, but they're going to be, I think, a slow change towards the EV. Yeah, I don't think they want to be the guinea pigs either. So looking at some of the examples from other cities. Anyway, the kickoff meeting has occurred with ICF and moving along. So keep you all informed as we make progress there. And the second bullet, I know we're getting close to time, and this next one has quite a bit of information and change that's happened in the last week. And I'll thank PJ for alerting me to the new Senate Bill 266, which is there was there was a lot of action at the state legislature in regard to Bill 261, and what basically happened was a Bill 266, which was so I'm just trying to read through some of the highlights here. So the Bill 261 was sitting in the House rules and it was not being included in the Senate budget version to moving forward. So it was kind of stalled out. And so a number of senators issued a new bill, which is number 266, which they're calling the Power Bill Reduction Act. Which
well, hold on. So 261 was passed by the Senate.
Correct.
The House was not happy with it.
Right.
The Senate bill, which was 266, that dealt with the reconstruction building in Western North Carolina, gutted.
Okay.
Then they gutted the bill and put in their own power and energy bill that's going to be sent back to the Senate. So they're not using the same 261. They're using 266. Apparently, this is normal procedure, but yeah, they did. It's even they're two different numbers. It's weird.
Yeah, it's just going to confuse the issue even more, it feels like. But yeah, they gutted the original Bill 266 and reinserted all of, you know, some 30 pages of proposed new energy policy rules, which still includes reducing that interim carbon reduction goal for 2030, as well as it still includes that construction work in process portion, which will allow them to bill ratepayers for construction work that's in progress or it's even producing any energy. Crazy.
And it puts us on the hook if the project doesn't go forward.
Correct. So, yeah, PJ, any other input there? I know just reading, I've just kind of got a brief from the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association on kind of what happened. This all happened like last Wednesday till current. And I know it went in front of the House Energy and Public Utilities Committee. which debated it on Wednesday. Even though it hadn't, I think it was only publicly available a short time before the committee meeting. I mean, with like minutes before the committee
Big
meeting.
surprise. Yeah, big surprise.
So they are really trying to rush it through without getting,
Why, do you know, PJ, why the House didn't like it? How did they change it from the way the Senate passed it?
Let's see. So there's two real major provisions. The first provision was around interim date. And I don't believe there were any changes around interim date in the House's version. The big changes were around the construction work in progress provision and the different there's some additional guardrails and some open items that were vague in the Senate's version that they wanted to clarify.
In a good way or a bad way?
I think holistically it's better than it was in the previous version.
the other development was Councilman Joyner sitting in on our last meeting and hearing our discussion on this. He has asked for an agenda briefing on what at the time was Bill 261, which will now have updated, give him information on this new Bill 266, but they want a agenda briefing for the full city council on early July or some, one of the July meetings. So
From this committee?
from staff.
From staff?
But
Do y'all have a lobbyist? Who's your lobbyist? Or is
Kara
Kara.
Spencer.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, she's part of the discussion as well. So she's involved.
Well, we're
Does
not
he want-
meeting right in July, so I mean.
We're not, yeah, I mean, but it was a result of us bringing it up at our last meeting.
So you'll do an agenda briefing at your agenda briefings?
Yeah.
Not at the thing.
Not the full council meeting.
And does David want to like the city to take a position, or does he just want to be a little more on top of it
I think he just wants to get this in front of the full.
in front of all of them?
So, yeah, just clear information. And I mean, he also brought up, you know, is this going to impact our goal in some way? And if so, what would be the process for changing our goal? So,
Oh, right, because the interim, yeah. He's worried about, we're not gonna make our goals because
Yeah.
Duke's not gonna make their goals,
right.
right? All right, Kia, if you do a written report, could we have copies of that? Like whatever slide deck you make for,
Absolutely.
that'd be great.
Yeah. Provide.
As far as the clean energy goal we were doing, well, I don't know with this new building, but
Yeah,
we were doing good. Like it was kind of like in 2030, would have basically reached it with not having to do too much, right? Is that right? It was like 50.
Particularly if Duke were staying on their pathway,
Yeah.
but if this is going to impact that
Right.
in some way, I mean, right, our goal right now is 50% by 2035, and the grid, plus whatever small amount that we're producing with our limited solar systems right now is high 40s somewhere. So there was let's say 5 to 10% somewhere in there that we're gonna need to make.
Wow. Yeah, especially they try to add a bunch of natural gas for like data centers or something, and that shoots it in one direction.
Yeah. So yeah, there was quite a bit of movement since our last meeting, and even in the last week in regard to these bills in regard to the Duke's goals. So stay tuned for more. There's I'm sure there's links out there if you guys ever want. Or
Yeah,
action
I
item.
haven't had a chance to look at that or even heard about it, but spending times with two kids. I don't get to see any TV unless it's kids' TV.
Yeah, there's I'm sure there'll probably be some movement in the next week or two, so we're just trying to stay informed as best we can, and yeah, again, provide accurate information to our city council when that agenda briefing comes up. So any other comments, PJ? Rich, if you're still there too?
I have nothing.
Yeah, I don't have anything. Just really curious to see how, like, with these EVs pulling so much and then adding data centers on top of that, I just don't see how they're gonna be able to meet the demand. But that's kind of out of our purview. We just do what we can on our end. So yeah, that was the only thing I'm really pulling out of it.
It's very much a changing landscape in regard to energy demand.
Well,
Yeah, so
I
those-
mean, I remember when I was in college in like when I was doing my thesis in 2013, like a 3 megawatt turbine was like a huge deal. And now they're talking about like 1 megawatt chargers is pretty bananas.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think I was looking at 3.5 megawatt turbines, wind turbines. And that was
Yeah.
2008, and those were like massive.
Yeah, exactly.
See what happens.
All I have, if you would like to
Should I adjourn the meeting? All right.
All
Thanks for
right.
joining
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks, y'all.
Enjoy the
We'll
rest of
see
your
you
trip.
Again in August.
Thanks, guys.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
Keep in
no July
July.
meeting. No July meeting.
no July
Yeah,
meeting.
no
correct.
July meeting, right? All right.
Thanks, guys.
See everybody in August.
Cheers.
Thanks.